Calligraphy is the art of writing, and one needs the right tools to do the right job, pun intended. For the ancient Chinese, these tools were collectively called what sounded like a league of superheroes, the four treasures of the intellectual study. And today, we will take a look at these four treasures. Not these four. Yes, these four. You may ask, wait a moment, but I only see three. As Confucius, the sage who was often credited for things he never actually said, the ink is in the inkstone. In the original order of their collective name, they are the brush, the ink, the paper, and the inkstone, or in Chinese, 笔墨纸砚. The brush, the backbone of this whole practice, which left us thousands of years of classics, poetry, novels, paintings, and imagination. It is most commonly made with wood and the hair of goat or wolf. A common variety is a combination of goat and wolf hair, which blends the softness of goat hair with the bristliness of that of wolf, creating a neutral, versatile writing device suitable for a wide variety of calligraphy styles. To hold the brush, the most common way is to pick up the brush with your thumb and your index finger. Apply just enough pressure so the brush doesn't fall, and let gravity do the magic of aligning the brush vertically downwards. Then, rest your middle finger below your index finger. Apply a gentle force, as if you want to pull the brush towards you, and then slightly push the first knuckle of your ring finger against the shaft, as if to counter the force of your middle finger. Finally, rest your little finger naturally below your ring finger. It sounds like a lot, I know, but with time and practice you will get used to it, and it will come to you as second nature. With a hand in the right position, what about the rest of our body? One can remain seated, but upright, or remain standing and slightly bent forward, or in a kneeling position if you insist on reliving ancient lifestyles. But I like the standing position. It is slightly more difficult than writing sitting down, but it's just more gratifying to have a wider range of motion when I write in big characters with long strokes. But I shall concede, it is more practical to sit down to write in small characters. Before one uses the brush, it needs to be soaked in water, so that the brush head is softened up. The water is best to be lukewarm. Too warm, and it may reduce the potency of the glue that keeps the brush head on the shaft. Too cold, and it will take much longer to soften, and may result in a stiffer writing experience. After the practice, it is important to wash the brush in lukewarm water and wash off the ink as much as possible. And if you have a cap for the brush, do not wear it on the brush until it's fully dry. But if all these seem too fastidious, let's reduce it to the bare minimum. Not a fan of the holding position, just hold it like you hold a regular pen. If you don't have a brush, or don't want to bother taking it out, just use your index finger and follow along the strokes of the characters without dipping in any kind of liquid. These are indeed not best practices, but let's not constrain our spirit in the forms. The tools we use shall not take precedence over the experience we seek. And if you have enough interest to get serious, you can find a lot about how to do it right. It is not my job or my intention to be didactic and tell you what you should do. Think of me as but a humble guide, and I shall never take away your freedom to explore this new world of possibilities. The ink. Before those ones and zeros in our computers or phones light up pixels and magically show us what we write on digital screens, we needed real ink to write with. In calligraphy practice, the ink is thick in texture and sometimes has an aromatic or pungent smell to it, depending on the manufacturer and how much chemical additives they put. Alternatively, ink can be prepared just in time before the writer starts writing, much like how modern hipsters grind their own beans to make fresh coffee. One can also grind ink sticks to make fresh ink. In richer households in the old days, this was done by a dedicated person, called a 书童, literally translates to a writing boy. But we can think of them as writing assistants. Today, we often skip the chore of ink grinding by buying ready-made ink. This ink is often thicker than we need, so it's important to dilute it to our desired consistency before writing. I wish there were a recipe to quote on how many parts water to 1 part ink. But because there isn't, we can use the paper we write on to tell if the consistency is good enough. As a general rule, the ink-water mixture, once written on the paper, should not expand too much. If it's slightly wider but the shade remains the same, then it should be good. But if it expands too much and the shade is too bright, that can only mean that there is too much water. Then again, if you are not in the mood of playing the alchemist, just use the ink directly. But don't be surprised when you experience a little extra friction as you write. If you run out of ink or don't want to bother with the cleaning or potential risk of staining, you could always just use plain water. Again, this is a minimalist substitute, not a recommended practice. The paper. Writing existed prior to the invention of paper. There is no question about it. For the Chinese, it started out with shells and bones, the usual suspects used by ancestors across cultures. As writing evolved and more information needed to be stored, wood and bamboo slips were used instead. You can imagine our ancestors sitting in a kneeling position, holding one slip in the hand, writing vertically from top to bottom, character after character, slip after slip, until all that was on the mind were converted to written form on the wood. They would then compile them by running strings through the slips, sewing them together into scrolls, the final product that we often see today. When you think about it, the infinite scrolling social feed, so common in our modern daily life, is very much like that of these ancient scrolls. Funny how innovations sometimes go around in circles. Enough history and back to the paper. The paper used for calligraphy is generally referred to as 宣 paper or rice paper. There are indeed subcategories. Depending on the calligraphy style, one subcategory might be more suitable than the other. If you ever run out of rice paper and are itching for some calligraphy and chill, just use newspaper. Yes, it is also a minimalist substitute, but this is a legit alternative given the similar permeability between newspaper and the rice paper. This was also a common practice in many calligraphy classrooms back when I was in school. It is generally recommended to lay a writing pad below the paper, such that if the ink permeates through the paper, it doesn't stain the tabletop below. Alternatively, you can lay a few pages of newspapers or whatever that is thin, flat, and not so slippery. And also, if accidentally stained, you wouldn't feel bad about it. Those free t-shirts from conferences and volunteer activities make good candidates. The inkstone. A functional, yet oftentimes exquisite device, the inkstone allows the writer to refill the brush, scrape off extra ink, rest the brush temporarily to recollect thoughts, or to go to the bathroom, or simply to show off the sophistication and taste of the owner. For most of us using ready-made ink, its functional value is really just to hold the ink. Whereas in ancient times, or for those people who like things the old ways, one would use it for grinding with an inkstick. With that said, finding substitute for the inkstone is much easier. You can use a bowl, a cup, or anything airtight on the bottom and provides enough room to dip the brush. But please don't use your favorite wine glass. You may accidentally break it, along with your heart. Now you know the basics of all the necessary tools, how they should be prepared if needed at all, and what replacement you could use if you don't happen to have the right tool at hand. One last word of advice. Calligraphy practice, like any practice that focuses on the mental wellness, is not something to be rushed or shown off. Take your time, take it slow, and you may find joy and peace in doing so. And who knows, maybe you will find a connection with someone from a long time ago. Goodbye for now, and until next time.